This is Citizenship and Immigration Attorney Parviz Malakouti. Today is October 30th, 2025. Welcome to our 46th Mobility Space. Today we're talking about the news with the Portuguese nationality law. So we're going to be talking about Portuguese residence by investment. And we're going to use this as an illustration to talk about general naturalization eligibility attack vectors. And I'm going to talk a lot about that second aspect because that's highly generally applicable across the world. It's not just something that's specific to the Portugal situation, but the Portugal situation is a good illustration. So we're going to be talking about that today. As a reminder, this is our 46th mobility space of 50 that we're doing this year on the hottest topics in dual citizenship, freedom of movement, sovereignty, and of course, passports. Okay, so for those who don't know, Portugal's RBI, residence by investment and citizenship, is in the news recently because there has been, or there is forthcoming, it looks like, a big change in the Portuguese naturalization eligibility criteria, specifically the timeline. Okay, so just as a very, very brief overview, Portugal has a residence by investment program. The way it roughly works, or the way it was presented, is you obtain temporary residence in Portugal by investment. You get that for 2 years. You can renew a couple times, and then after 5 years of having residency, you qualify for Portuguese naturalization eligibility. The big attractive feature of the Portuguese golden visa was, dare I say, possibly still is, the minimum physical presence requirement. Very minimal physical presence requirement for the person to be able to be on the path to naturalization eligibility. This was attractive for people who want to work towards a second citizenship, but don't want to upend their entire lives and spend a majority of the time, day by day, in that foreign country. So that's why this was highly attractive. Some people also got the Portuguese golden visa that do want to spend a lot of time there, but I think there's less of a value proposition there because Portugal has a whole other panoply of other types of visas and residencies for people to work towards naturalization if they want to have a lot of physical presence there. Anyway, fast forward to, I believe it was last week, and the news came out that it looks like Portugal's parliament was going to vote on extending the naturalization eligibility from 5 years to 7 for people for applicants that are citizens of the European Union or the CPLP, so the Union of Portuguese-speaking countries, or to 10 years for all other nationalities, so for Americans, for example. A couple of days later, as I understand it, the parliament took a vote and they voted to approve those changes. I'm not an expert on Portuguese law. I'm not an expert on the Portuguese golden visa, but as I understand it, there are still a few other steps that have to happen for this bill to go to be approved, to become law. Okay, but it doesn't look good for Portuguese golden investor visas who were on the path to naturalization eligibility and hoping to be able to apply after only 5 years of residency. Okay, so I don't know what's going to happen. I'll just say this from the outset. I don't know what's going to happen eventually with this change. I don't know if it's going to be totally approved and go into law. I don't know if it's going to become law and then be judicially, well, I'm certain it's going to be judicially challenged if it becomes law, but I don't know if it's going to be defeated. Maybe it's going to go into law and maybe it'll hold. Maybe it'll hold for a year or two before it's defeated judicially. Maybe it'll be defeated right away. I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. Okay, so I want to be clear about that from the outset. What I hope to do in this space is to talk about this attack vector and what we can learn from this situation with Portugal, okay, and what it means for aspiring sovereign individuals who are looking to pick up multiple citizenships, some of which they're possibly looking to pick up by getting residency in a foreign country, especially residency by investment, and basically work towards naturalization eligibility with minimal physical presence on the ground. Okay, so there's a few issues. Okay, well, more than a few issues. Obviously, for people who have Portuguese residency by investment, there's some potential problems that come up, okay, which is, first of all, possibility of a further lockdown period of whatever investment they chose, okay, before they can unload after getting out of that residency and getting naturalized. That's one issue. Another issue is potentially minors, derivative minors, who they may have wanted to include in their applications, right? And then there's all the other potential issues that could arise for specific people depending on why they were trying to work towards Portuguese naturalization, right? There's all different reasons that a person might want to get Portuguese citizenship that has something other to do than just having to be able to have residency there, right? Because remember, the residents by investment still have their residency intact. It's not that they're shut out of Portugal by virtue of this change if it becomes law. But here's a few big ones. Okay, first one that comes to my mind right away. Okay, because whenever I have people who are pursuing citizenship in an EU country, top of their mind is satellite residency rights in other EU countries. Okay, so a lot of Portuguese residents by investment are working towards Portuguese citizenship because they want to have the ability to be resident in other EU countries. Okay, so France or Spain or Hungary or Slovakia or Poland. Okay, that's going to be delayed, if not entirely jeopardized, right? Because some people, when you tack on additional 2 to 5 years of lead up to naturalization eligibility, for some people that's going to be just a delay of 2 to 5 years. But for some profiles, because of their other circumstances, that might result in them not being able to ever make it actually to naturalization. That's an important point that we're going to talk about, which is timeline to naturalization eligibility does not mean timeline to citizenship. Okay. And this is something I know I'm a broken record about this. I harp on this. I harp on what I consider malicious clickbaiters in the industry who peddle in that type of language. Those are two totally different things, completely different. Now, if you're not in the mobility space and citizenship and immigration, I can see how it could seem like just a vague difference in language. Maybe it's just sloppy language, or maybe you're quibbling over language. No, in reality, in practice, time to eligibility to apply for a benefit in no way, shape, or form is time until you get that benefit. We're going to talk about that in more detail. But first and foremost, okay, so Portuguese RBIs who wanted satellite right of residency in other EU countries, that's going to be delayed or foreclosed entirely. Secondly, some people are going to have wanted the actual passport, the Portuguese passport, not visa-free access given by the citizenship, but the actual passport, a second travel document. That's going to be delayed or foreclosed, obviously, for those people. Third, visa-free access. Okay, so for applicants, especially if they came from a country that has weak visa-free access, maybe they were looking forward to that Portuguese nationality in order to be able to visit a number of countries visa-free. Okay, a fourth one, ability to renounce the original citizenship, right? And this might be one that impacts Americans. There's a lot of Americans that are generally vaguely what I call renunciation curious, okay? When they start acquiring additional mobility benefits, citizenships and residencies, they have not made a decision to renounce U.S. citizenship. They're not even sure that they're ever going to, but it's on their radar. They're curious about it. And they know that in order to renounce citizenship and still have immediate highest right of access to a country and a travel document and a set of visa-free countries that they can travel to, they're going to need at least one other citizenship. Okay, this is going to be a problem for people in that profile that got Portuguese residency by investment. Okay, so their ability to renounce the original citizenship could possibly be delayed, if not foreclosed entirely. Number 5, the need for nationality toggling to access a third country. Nationality toggling. Okay. Perfect example. Trump made a travel ban on June 4th. Okay, it's kind of the successor of his first travel ban, the so-called Muslim travel ban from his first administration, and he basically restricted from entrance to the country nationals of certain countries. Okay, now if those nationals, let's say Iran. I pick on Iran a lot as an example. Iran is one of the countries. Okay, so nationals of Iran generally, there's some exceptions, but generally, per the travel ban, have an entry prohibition. However, if that Iranian citizen has another nationality and another passport pursuant to that nationality, they're exempt from that travel ban, okay, assuming that they apply for the visa or the residency in the United States using the other nationality and the other passport. So if you're an Iranian and you got a Portuguese golden visa and you're right on the cusp of being able to apply for Portuguese naturalization, and you want to visit your family in the United States on a tourist visa or otherwise, right? Under the old regime, if you applied for Portuguese naturalization and you naturalized, became a citizen, got the passport, you could sidestep that travel ban by nationality toggling. Okay, you could basically switch off. Oh, I'm not Iranian for the purposes of this visa application in the United States. And by not Iranian, I don't mean you don't disclose it. I mean basically you're applying for the U.S. visa or whatever it is, the ESTA, being a national of another country. Well, that's a problem for those people now. They're not going to be able to nationality toggle for another 2 to 5 years or possibly at all because of obviously this change, okay? And then a sixth potential issue for this profile that comes to mind is people who wanted to take advantage of treaty benefits of Portuguese citizenship. So this is kind of similar to some of the benefits that we spoke about before, but a little bit different. Okay, so Portugal, as well as most countries, if not all countries on Earth, they enter into treaties with other countries, both mobility-based treaties, visas, residency categories, etc., as well as non-mobility types of treaties, right? And sometimes, for many of those treaties, the basis for eligibility to participate is being citizen of the country. Okay, so an example I'll use is just with the United States again. Okay, United States has the E2 non-immigrant investor visa. It's only available to countries that are party to the E2 non-immigrant investor visa treaty. Excuse me. Portugal is party to that. Okay, so if you have citizenship in a country that is not part of that treaty, and you wanted to basically be an E2 non-immigrant investor in the United States, and you got Portuguese residency by investment, and you are about to qualify, or let's say you're going to qualify, to apply for naturalization in another year or two. Well, previously you could have become Portuguese and then applied for the E2 treaty investor visa to springboard in the United States. Now that's going to be once again delayed or foreclosed, right? Because of this new news, right? So that's my introduction. We got Jay here, we got Patrick here. Patrick, I'm inviting you to speak, okay? And let me throw out the first question to Jay today, okay? Jay, how damaging do you think? First of all, what are your general thoughts, okay, about this news about the Portugal RBI? And then, secondly, how damaging do you think it is to people that are already in this program? So basically, residents by investment that were hoping to qualify to apply for naturalization within a set period of time.
So I'm going to answer your second question first. I think that it's quite damaging to the people who got the Portuguese golden visa residency by investment in order to move to other EU countries or take advantage of springboard benefits that are associated with being a citizen of Portugal. For example, somebody who gets that and then they want to move to Switzerland or France or Italy, like you said, that person is foreclosed to Portugal for the next 5 years, however long it takes for them to get to the 10-year naturalization eligibility, and then additionally for the time that it takes to actually become a citizen of Portugal, which people who are looking at mobility benefits in foreign countries probably don't trust their own government that ostensibly has duty to look out for the interests of their citizens. Other governments have that same sort of deal. They're looking at the Portuguese government is looking after Portuguese before residents and foreigners of all types. So they're looking at making their laws for the benefit of their citizens, and their citizens, because of recent migration waves of people from other countries, whether you like it or not, some of them have gotten sick of immigration, and they have wanted to clamp down on giving residency out to foreigners and giving citizenship specifically to foreigners who have come in, especially within the past 5 years. So that's it's going to be damaging to the people who want springboard mobility benefits. However, the people who want to be in Portugal and did this program specifically for access to that country, it might not affect them as much as we would think. Extra time to naturalization eligibility, while it is a huge inconvenience for somebody who is looking at the benefit of being able to reside in Portugal, waiting extra time to get that benefit of naturalization, they can get their permanent residency after 5 years regardless. So they may not be quite as impacted by this change. As to my general thoughts about the change and the impact that it has on people in the residency by investment program, I think that this was probably a totally foreseeable change. A lot of European countries have been extending their timelines to convert residency into becoming a citizen of that country, in large part because of the influx of immigrants from various countries, especially less developed, less culturally similar parts of the world. So this was probably foreseeable, and it's something that people really need to keep in mind. The entire timeline for Portugal was never 5 years. If people who were boosting this were spending some time on the ground, and if they knew people who were in Portuguese residency limbo, it takes a much longer time to get the residency in the first place than one would think, because it's been so backed up, and then getting the citizenship on the end of that after the residency period that's required can also take a long time. And that's, everybody I think knows here that it takes a long time and it's very difficult to become a US citizen. I don't understand why people would think, Parviz, maybe you would know, I don't understand why people would think that other countries and other governments would really make it much easier. Like, it's supposed to be difficult to become a citizen of another country. Like, that's not something that people normally do just on a daily basis, just become a citizen of 30 countries or whatever. That's just not something that's common.
Jay, let me throw a question back at you real quickly. Does it take, as a service provider, being on the ground and being in the nitty gritty to know that there was never a 5 year path to getting Portuguese citizenship, or does it just take understanding that the concept of application processing time exists and being honest?
It takes the latter, but with Portugal, it was much more attenuated, and people would know if they knew anybody living in Portugal at this time that the residency and citizenship process there has had serious issues.
Absolutely. Yeah, and to answer your question, obviously I'm a citizenship attorney. I get people that have consults with me, and oftentimes I get insight into what people are taking, what people are understanding from content that they consume online, because oftentimes I have to spend 10, 15, 20 minutes of our limited consultation time to unwind just misunderstandings that people have. A constant one that comes up, okay, is this idea of they read these things: 5 years to Portuguese citizenship, 3 years to Armenian citizenship, okay, or not. Actually, it's even worse. They don't even say to citizenship, to passport. 5 years to Portuguese passport, 3 years to Armenian passport, for example. The list goes on. Well, that excludes the time to prepare for a residency application, okay, the time the residency application is pending, okay, the time to prepare for naturalization application after you've had residency. If you sometimes you cannot fully prepare until after you've gotten past the minimum period of residency. Sometimes you can prepare simultaneously. That's a kind of a case specific thing. The time for the processing of the naturalization application, the time to be sworn in, And then in the instance where those people are saying to passport, and then you apply for a passport after the fact, okay, the time that the passport application is pending, okay, that's just timeline, okay. Now, what's even more pernicious? So those quotes, those examples that I hear all the time, okay, which tons of clickbaiters say out there, including some big accounts, okay, some big websites, some big daily websites, okay, so to speak, okay, peddling that type of language. And I've had direct, verbal confrontation with them about that. That's not even the most pernicious aspect of phrasing paths, to citizenship this way. In my opinion, the more pernicious aspect is that the way it's presented by these clickbaiters, okay, forecloses the inquiry, the possibility of the person being denied. Okay, it makes it seem like it's just automatic. Okay, that once you start this process with us, okay, you're in the pipeline. Okay, the clock is ticking. At the end of 5 years, you get the passport. Absolutely not. Anybody who's done anything with immigration, who's worked, especially professionals, okay, they know every step of the way is an application, and every application has attack vectors and has the possibility of denial, especially over a timeline, because things change over time. Laws change under time. The applicant's personal profile changes over time, okay? And there's a few really, common, let's say, types of attack vectors along the way. Okay, one is a lawful legislative change. Okay, so lawful legislative change to naturalization eligibility criteria while the applicant is resident. And I'm not just talking about Portugal. This is universally applicable. Okay, this is the case. I guess in law you should never say in every single one, but this is the case in the vast majority of programs, the vast majority of countries. Okay, when you're resident on the path to trying to apply for naturalization, to be eligible to apply for naturalization, the country could change. They could lawfully, legislatively change the law. What do I mean by lawful legislative change? I mean a change that comports with the country's constitution, or with whatever is, the highest basically authority of law. Okay, that's a fact of life. That happens. Number two, unlawful legislative changes happen. Okay, what do I mean by unlawful? What I mean is a change that's made at a parliamentary level or congressional level that might not actually comport with the country's constitution. Maybe it's actually unlawful, okay, in the legal sense, big L, capital L, okay? But maybe it's going to take, when that's the case, it takes time for that law to be challenged and then struck down. Sometimes that could happen in months. Sometimes it can happen in years, literally, okay? And from the applicant's perspective, okay, it's really important to understand, from the applicant's perspective, they're much more interested in what their experience of the law is, rather than what actually the theoretical, academic, intellectual, phrasing of the law is. Both matter, for sure. Both matter. And as a practitioner, you have to know both, okay? But the applicant doesn't care about what's actually really legal, okay? But it's going to take 15 years, okay, for the country to right the ship, okay, and to strike that law down. They don't care about that. They care about, I put this money in, I do this, I jump through these hoops, do I get the citizenship or not? Okay, so to the extent that there's a threat of deviation between the two, okay, basically between their experience of what the law is and what actually is lawful, they got to know about that, okay? And competent advisory and ethical advisory is about informing your clients about that, okay, about these types of attack vectors. So that's number two. That's unlawful legislative change, okay? Number three, and Patrick's here. Patrick might have something to say about this from his experience. Agency level change or interpretation of the requirements. Okay, so number three is not change in the parliament, not change in Congress, just the agency level. Okay, the agencies have to interpret the statutes in most countries don't say every little bit about how the application should work and how should be processed. The statutes cover broad strokes, okay, and then the laws turn over to agencies who process the applications for their interpretation. Those agencies change their interpretation sometimes. Sometimes they constrict the eligibility criteria in a way. If you're on the edge, maybe that constriction has you on the outside now looking in. Okay, that's a problem, especially in citizenship by descent, and a lot of other contexts. Okay. Number four, changing your personal status. Okay. So if you have to maintain a status for a certain period of time, so in this case, residence. Okay. So in the United States, it's legal permanent residence before applying for naturalization. In Portugal, it's residency. It could be temporary or permanent before applying for naturalization. But if you have to maintain a personal status during that period of time, okay, in order to qualify for naturalization eligibility, then time is your enemy, of course, okay, because the more time that passes, right, the greater the chance that you're going to have some change in your life that's going to, change that status, okay. Then there's another attack vector, unwritten change in an agency level culture of requirement strictness. Okay, so this is related to number three. Okay, so sometimes the agencies explicitly, overtly change their interpretation. They say this is what we're doing. There's an internal memo or an external memo or a combination, or a change in regulation, okay, that's published. But number five, sometimes the change doesn't happen on that level, actually. Sometimes it's just a new set of instructions to the adjudicators, a new set of, and obviously, there's tension with, how much that can deviate, right? Sometimes the unofficial interpretation at the agency level can deviate so much that the argument can be made that it's no longer lawful, okay, right? Sometimes it happens. But the bottom line is, going back to our concept of applicants being concerned with law as they experience it, if you're an applicant and you experience an unwritten change in the agency's, culture of requirements, and it has you on the outside looking in, okay, well, typically you got to spend time and possibly significant money in order to challenge that. That's an attack vector, okay? And then number six, and this is not all comprehensive, but these are just what I think are probably the six biggest attack vectors for residents on the path to naturalization eligibility. Number six is the development of a backlog, a processing backlog, multi-month or possibly even multi-year. And again, that's why it's so important, okay, to not, it's dishonest. It's not just vague language. It's dishonest to say 5 years to a passport when really the truth is 5 years to naturalization eligibility under current law, okay? Because you've got this thing called processing time. At the beginning of the 5 year period, maybe the processing time is 6 weeks. Okay. And a lot of Johnny come latelys, in the industry, people who are not, lawyers, advisors, consultants, people don't really take it seriously. They were selling, bean bags last year, and now they're selling this. They just don't have the experience or the knowledge to understand this. It could be 6 weeks when they sell the Portuguese golden visa to the person. And maybe 6 years from now, when that person is applying for naturalization, maybe that backlog is 2 years. Maybe it's a year and a half. It matters. It matters to say what that is. Processing time is a real thing. It matters, okay, both for the potential delay as well as for the potential that it could foreclose your entire eligibility for the thing. Okay, so this is absolutely critical. I've gotten pushback, for harping on this, especially when I've kind of quote tweeted other people. I've gotten messages from mutuals, okay, between me and some of those other people, but it is what it is. This is the truth, okay, and mobility influencers who are peddling that nonsense, I don't care how big they are, it's not true, okay, it's not true. It's, in my opinion, dishonest, and it's how people get wrecked, right? Let me kick it to you, Patrick, okay. I'll start off with the first question for you, Patrick. Was this type of change, Patrick, unpredictable in your opinion?
Ah, man, you asked me the question I wanted to be asked. And I think I'm going to preface it by saying this is why it's important to have a good consultant or professional in this process. Was it predictable? I would say yes. Was it expected? Um, I think it was expected. This probably comes a little bit sooner than most expected, but it was expected. And I'll preface it by saying something I've said before, which is you have to do at least a back of the napkin level, political economy analysis on some of these programs. And, I'm going to also steal from you, Jay, because you asked exactly the right question, which was how was this program designed, and why was it designed this way to begin with? And people forget Portugal was under a dictatorship until 1971. It was considered the poor man of Europe, similar to like a Balkan country for 30 years. Um, you know, I've been forced to watch a few rom-coms in my days, and people forget that in Love Actually, Colin's first love interest is this poor Portuguese lady whose family is like insistent that she gets married off because she's good for nothing, right? That was Portugal in 2000. I think that movie was 2002. So like that was not even 25 years ago. And the Portugal we know today is a little bit different. It is a place for some tech startups. It's had a resurgent wine scene. It has democracy for 30 plus years now. It's a very different place than the hopeful aspirational country it was even 10 years ago. So and then you put COVID policy on the back of that. And you know I'm a native Californian. I say that constantly, so I hope you all know that. But the question was, if California is such a rough place to live during COVID, during tax policy, whatnot, a lot of people are like, well, where else can I go in the world that's like California? And the short answer is there's basically like two or three, and one of them is Portugal. There is a huge community of Californians in Portugal. And if you back that up against the cultural insistence of much of Europe, you can see how waves of wealthy people driving up the prices of real estate, not speaking the language, and having minimal time on the ground just don't culturally integrate. That policy definitely has a political half-life. And you see that in other places as well. So I think just from broad political analysis, this was coming. And if you're really smart and you look at these programs, you got to see if there's some sort of timeline guarantee, because if the timeline can change, if the policy can change, um, you get caught flat-footed, especially if you had a pretty significant outlay of investment, either financially or timeline-wise. Yeah, I'll stop there, but I have a bunch of examples from. I mean, obviously, I do citizenship by descent, so the historical aspect of some of these records is important to me. But Italy had very similar. There's a lot of parallels to the change in Italian citizenship by descent, which I'm intimately aware of, and can pull everything you talked about, Parvis. I can pull examples directly from Italy for you. But yeah,
Yeah,
having that change in policy is pretty significant for those who have invested into it.
definitely. I want to get into some of those examples for sure. Patrick, I'm so glad that you brought up expected. You said the word expected, right? I said unpredictable. Are these the same thing? I don't think they're the same thing. Okay. And let me explain. So expected to me is a step beyond saying something's, predictable, okay, or unpredictable. Okay. What I mean by predict, and again, this is my meaning. I want to be clear, I want to be clear about what I mean. Okay. What I mean, first of all, I don't think that this was unpredictable, this type of change. Okay. And I got receipts to prove it. Okay. I've been tweeting about it with timestamps, both the general concept as well as the possibility in this particular context. Okay. Portugal. This was so predictable, meaning so viewable as a possible serious attack vector. So obvious, in my opinion, if you're competent as an advisor, and you're ethical, okay, to me, it was totally foreseeable as a possibility, as a significant possibility. Now, expected, like I said, I see that as being a step beyond. It's not just saying, hey, this is a real threat. There's a significant chance this could happen. Be aware of this. Factor that into your decision making. That to me, that's predictable, unpredictable. Expected is I'm coming down, I'm saying this is happening, this is going to happen on this timeline. And I don't have beef with people who didn't exactly say that this is going to happen, because that's a much harder game in my opinion. That's real crystal ball stuff. That's saying, okay, yeah, for sure this is going to happen. And nobody has a crystal ball. Even if you're really, really informed, even if you really follow this, nobody can say for certain. And I don't think that's a realistic standard to hold practitioners to, okay, or even for applicants to try to aspire to, right? But to not introduce this possibility, okay, to clients, to not discuss it, to bring it up, say, hey, this could happen. This happens, in legal systems. This is a function of legal systems generally. This is not, the possibility of change while somebody is working towards a future legal status, it's not even unique to immigration. Okay, this is just a function of legal systems. Okay, so to not bring that up, or to even, like I said, phrase the timeline in such a way to imply that application timeline does not matter. It matters so little that it shouldn't even be mentioned. Okay, that's my problem. I have a problem with that. Okay, I got a big beef with that. So I don't blame practitioners for not saying, "Oh yeah, for sure this will happen." I don't think anybody can really be clear to that level. Not even the greatest scholars, etc. But yeah, like I said, I guess I'm just repeating myself here. It should, the possibility, the threat of this happening should have been mentioned to all RBI, potential applicants. Like I said, I wrote in a tweet a couple of days ago. No Portuguese resident by investment. I get it. They're disappointed. They're probably annoyed. They're probably pissed off, hoping that this bill doesn't pass into law. I get that. That's legitimate. And honestly, I hope it doesn't. I'm not happy in any way, shape, or form, right, that this is happening. But no Portuguese resident by investment should be totally blindsided by this news. None. Not a single one should be totally blindsided by this news. If a Portuguese resident is totally blindsided, had no idea that this could happen by this news, then I would have serious questions about whoever helped them. And the thing is, I mean, most in these high ticket items, citizenship by investment, residence by investment, and even to a lesser extent too, even now citizenship by descent, we got salespeople floating around the industry that LARP as consultants and advisors. Salesmen are not consultants. They're not advisors. They're not lawyers. Salesmen sell, 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 sell. Always be closing, as Alec Baldwin said in Glengarry Glen Ross. The big difference is consultants, advisors, attorneys, advocates. Okay, they inform and they infuse the applicant or the potential client as much as possible with all their relevant knowledge in order to help them make a decision, including when the decision is to not do it, to not do the thing. Okay, I've had many people, not just Portuguese RBI. Okay, Portuguese RBI, other CBIs, who, when I really lay out the whole, the whole shebang, the whole view, especially considering for their personal profile, somebody who started off the consultation pretty sure that they thought they wanted to get one of these mobility assets, walks away not getting it. Okay, or sometimes I had one guy, actually Portuguese RBI, one guy highly interested in Portuguese RBI. I screened him for citizenship by descent. Turns out he qualified for an EU citizenship by descent. Totally foreclosed with the Portuguese RBI process in order to get the European citizenship by descent. This is the difference between an advisor slash consultant slash attorney and a salesperson or influencer on the other side. Now, Patrick, let's get into some examples, right? And I'm glad that you're on this call because a lot of these changes, these narrowings, all this type of stuff, we see this in the CBD world, don't we? Citizenship by descent, especially when it comes to changing of eligibility criteria. Okay, both by statute as well as by at the regulatory level, and then also changes in the application timeline, right? People who are applying for Italian citizenship by descent pre-pandemic had a little bit of a different experience, didn't they, than people who started applying at the beginning of the pandemic. What's your experience been?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because Italian citizenship offers basically every example that you spoke about earlier, because you can do it through a consular process, you can do it through a legal process, depending on how you're eligible, and there's all these carve outs depending on whether or not you're enacting it through a law or through uh, a consular a process. So um, basically, that change in law. Let me get my bearings right here. The change in law was so drastic and caught people so off guard that it actually, I know people who have left the industry, the genealogy, citizenship by descent industry, because of how fast and unpredictable that law was. And I'll lean into the example here, but not to bore everyone. But in early 2024, so a year and a half ago, there was someone who really wanted to, their local law, they were pursuing a citizenship by descent case through a female. It's a pre-1948 case. And this local judge had very parochial views on marriage and citizenship by descent law. So he broke with the process and said this guy was not eligible. And this person was well funded, and so they pushed they pushed the case up multiple through multiple appeals processes, up to the point where in October 2024, one of the versions of their Supreme Court, because there's multiple courts in Italy, said no, this is the case, you don't have citizenship. And it suddenly changed what is now known as the minor issue. So anyone who came to the United States as an Italian citizen, naturalized while their children were still minors. When the children were born in the States, had, oh, sorry for the wind, had jus soli American citizenship, but the right to Italian citizenship. This judge said, no go. They derived the lack of claims from their parent who naturalized. And so this was a big deal. But if you followed the opinions of some of the local courts, you were like, this idea exists out there and it's coming sooner than later. And I got that sense. When that happened, I specifically had several people who were pursuing Italian citizenship through a consulate. And I said, I think it's worth your money and your effort to pursue it through a legal case, because through a different ancestor, because I see this being an issue when you get your day at the consulate. And it turned out to be right. And then on top of that, through my experience with some of the comunes in Italy, every single comune person is either very young or very old. They don't want to work more than 35 hours a week. And 75% plus of their time is just registering citizenship documents or vital documents for citizenship by descent, which is not really what a comune in a small Italian village is supposed to be doing. And I sat there and I thought to myself, there is just too much of an interest in protecting, the civil service here from essentially foreigners claiming this huge benefit. I can see this being an issue in the future. Now, I didn't think it was going to come in 2025. I thought it was going to come in like 2028 to 2029. But the idea was out there. And so, but the common idea was that Italian policy is so dysfunctional that it would be impossible to get all the legislators together and get this to happen, which is why it came through the form of emergency decree. So I list this huge example because if you read the tea leaves and you understood the sentiment of people in political power, be it either bureaucratic or representative government, that sentiment at some point ultimately becomes policy, either through practical application or law. And Italy is the perfect example of that. And I can get into a bunch of myriad examples of it, but suffice it to say that if you look at Portugal, you can understand there was huge resistance against inflating asset prices. Was that foreigners? Maybe, but it might have been the EU interest rate policy and our inflation of asset prices. But the perception was that it was foreigners. And you know, if a politician thinks that they're going to have a bunch of political issues because of this benefit, and they need to change it, the incentive is there. And that's why every time you see some of these like hints at policy, you see a lot of mobility influencers online being like, oh, the UK or France is going to enact citizenship-based taxation, and they throw the alarms. I think it's important to keep in mind that. I think it's funny that mobility influencers are glued to that when there's some bill floated from some, hyper left or hyper right person in committee. But when it comes to naturalization policy or citizenship by descent policy, that is also true. No one talks about that. I saw nobody talking about potential changes in Italian citizenship by descent. And it's probably been the biggest change in what is considered a very sleepy aspect of mobility, like mobility programs and citizenship by descent programs. It's considered pretty old fashioned, but and requires arguably the most research and work as opposed to something more transactional. But those hints of people submitting changes in policy do come from committees. And if you are a true practitioner and keep your ear to the ground, you'll hear about it. And you can advise people appropriately.
Patrick, you said something in passing, which I think was so insightful. It has to be repeated. You said basically that public sentiment, when strong enough, it eventually manifests either through legislative change or kind of, at the regulatory level, whether it be formal and informal. That's such an important point, in my opinion, especially in the context of citizenship by investment or residency by investment, because there's just such a such antagonism towards it from certain certain areas. But even outside of that context, it's absolutely important. Even in the citizenship by descent context, when a country passes a CBD law, and then the people live there, the people of the country start to have the feeling that we've had our fill of Americans naturalizing here and getting our citizenship and our passport. You're putting your head in the sand if you just basically say, oh, well, that's not the law. It doesn't matter what they say, blah, blah, blah. No, eventually what people think, if it's strong enough, if it's intense enough of a public sentiment, will find its way to touching you and your application. So yeah, it's really, really important to consider. We got Analisa here. Analisa, if I could just ask you a question. So we started off talking about the change of the proposed the proposed law change for extending the naturalization eligibility criteria in Portugal, and then we extended talking about this generally, the concept of an attack vector to a person's naturalization when they have a residency period, especially a lengthy residency period. But I'd like to throw it back to Portugal to you real quickly, and just general question: do you think that this type of change that appears to be happening right now was unpredictable?
There we go. Sorry about that.
Sure.
Yeah, I was going to say I was surprised in Portugal because I lived through this in Spain where I have a golden visa which I got like 2 months before the program was ended for similar reasons, populist PR or something like that. But I was actually surprised that Portugal went so far so fast with this when they started off with such a generous position on taxes, on timing, on everything. It just seems like a really, really sharp and immediate shift. So yeah, it took me by surprise. But I have to say, I guess that's the reason why I went and got a second golden visa, because I didn't hold much faith in either of them. So that's how it goes.
Was it within the realm of possibility for you that this type of change could happen, where when a resident by investment is midstream, the NAT's eligibility could be significantly extended?
Yeah, I have to say I was probably pretty ignorant of that. I always assumed I would be grandfathered in. So this is a shocker.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that experience.
I'm going to jump in here, actually. Also going to mention Panama because I think it's relevant. They had the Friendly Nations visa for years under their two previous presidents ago. And the idea was that, Panama was willing to allow you to set up a company, and the concept of setting up a company in Panama is pretty easy and could be done for high 4 digits. You go through the process and you would get yourself essentially a form of permanent residency. And it was open to what they considered friendly nations, which was, I think, it was over 40 nations. The US was included. But the kicker was that 5-year naturalization eligibility timeline. But the kicker was that for years, no one ever actually adjudicated that. No one would naturalize people on the friendly nations visa. And I remember years ago, this is me thinking myself as an Ernst Hemingway sort of figure. I remember being at a bar in Panama talking to a handful of expats who had lived there for 15 years. And they said, oh, there's no way I can get Panamanian citizenship, even though I've been on the ground here for 15 years, because of just the complete lack of processing. And I sat there and I was like, okay, that's interesting. But during that same time there, I saw how much there was anti-immigrant sentiment, particularly because of how many wealthy Venezuelans were showing up in Panama. And so, I don't mean to paint with too broad a brush, but like generally speaking, Panama has a lot of service sectors, real estate, bars, restaurants, and generally speaking, a lot of Venezuelan immigrants who were there legally and illegally had higher levels of education, and so it was very easy for them to quote unquote take jobs away. It felt very like, I talk about that in the United States all the time. I'm like, this sentiment of like having immigrants take your jobs is not an American phenomenon. It happens in a lot of countries. And I sat there and I thought to myself, there's no way that the Friendly Nations visa stands indefinitely. And it was about a year and a half later when it was canceled. And so, again, if you understand the political sentiment, you can make predictions. And you know, there's a couple of different ways you can make predictions. Political sentiment is one of them. Bureaucratic or administrative processing is another. But in either scenario, it really pays to have some sense of what it looks like on the ground and whether or not you'll be able to time that correctly.
Patrick, I'm going to piggyback off of that. I am seeing now some of these, I guess I'll call them mobility influencers, talk about Panamanian naturalization after 5 years, and I'm like, their president has to sign it, and they have to process it. Generally, I would say that in countries where there is this strong anti-immigrant sentiment, like Panama, like Portugal, there are many countries around the world with this this anti-immigrant sentiment, and it's only growing in recent years, that people should expect changes like this. Practitioners especially should expect changes like this in tightening of requirements, tightening of eligibility, changes in process and procedure that make it more and more difficult to get some of these benefits.
Yeah, I would argue that like it goes back to the Harvard always talks about how robust the program is, and I think that if you're on the ground and you want to be part of the country and you're going through a naturalization process that has been that way for 20 years, that's a far more robust process than to take advantage of a new program that allows you to only have 2 weeks on the ground and has this timeline. I think there's a calculation there that works as it relates to Panama specifically. I believe Varela was the first president who started signing naturalization applications for the first time in like 2 or 3 presidents. So that's why suddenly you got a bunch of mobility influencers who are like, oh, now they're actually processing Panamanian citizenship. And it's true that they are, but it's on at the same timeline, that Friendly Nations visa is no longer there. So the hurdle rate for getting permanent residency is high, but they're actually now processing naturalization applications. Is that a 1 year timeline? Is it a 4 year timeline? I couldn't tell you. But it shouldn't matter if you have permanent residency and you make your life in Panama, right? So there's all these like components to it, which I'm bringing up because I think that's why the mobility influencers started jumping on it. But again, I still think it's an overpromise on the timeline, because the timeline is still, even if there's a light at the end of the tunnel, you don't know how long that tunnel is. And to say you know how long that tunnel is a sales job.
Right, and you don't know whether you come up for the benefit. Is the president going to want to sign your naturalization application? Because it's probably not going to be the same one.
Yeah, and I'll also add a funny little anecdote, and then I'll let Parvis speak because I keep cutting him off. But when I worked in the country for a little while, of Panama, and there was how do I put this? I worked in real estate there, so real estate is notoriously a relationship based business, and that's very true in a country of single digit million people. I think it's 6 million, 7 million people. And one of the contract guys who wanted to get a permit to redevelop what was an empty lot, but a historical empty lot, ended up like sleeping in his car outside of the local Municipio's like residents, and like they became friends, and he like bought him a birthday cake on his birthday, and it took him like 6 months, but he finally got what he wanted, and he was like the first guy to get a permit in like 6 years or something ridiculous. And it's just like, yeah, he forced himself to have a relationship with the person who made the decision. And I think that's also true with a lot of these, programs, particularly for smaller countries. I mean, you know, Portugal is not so small. It's, I have to check. I think it's around 27 million people. But the point is that policymakers are individual people, and you know their ability to like wake up in the morning and process your like obscure paperwork for a time sensitive program is probably going to be relatively limited. And they got to be really good and really honest at their job, and free from political you know pressures or headline pressures to say they're going to do what the law says they're going to do. And you need to have some confidence, 2, 3, 4, 5 years prior that that is actually going to happen. And that's difficult to do for most people.
And so, as some of you know, every Monday I publish what I call a mobility meme, and it's basically just a meme that I make that's some sort of reflection of citizenship and mobility news of the day, or some sort of insight or something like that. At the end of 2022, I believe, I published on Twitter as well as LinkedIn, and I have a lot of international lawyers, domestic lawyers, mobility professionals that I'm connected with, especially on LinkedIn. I published saying outright, look, I've never met a person that's naturalized in Panama. Okay, if has anybody in my network? If so, either you have naturalized, or you personally know somebody's naturalized. Not, oh, I know somebody who said their brother did or something like that. Can anybody tell me, if you're willing to, okay, that you know somebody that's naturalized in Panama? Nobody responded. Now, that doesn't mean that nobody, maybe somebody saw that and they said, they didn't want to bother to respond. But it was a pretty rare thing. I had a mobility meme from October 7th, 2023. I've linked it to this space, okay? And it's a picture of Mickey, the old coach from Rocky, and it says, "No way I'm going to let some young punk naturalize here," right? And that's just basically kind of just a tongue-in-cheek mention of the Panama, unofficial naturalization policy. And I kind of agree. I agree, Patrick, with what you're saying. There's kind of a Lindiness quality, to use a term of Nassim Taleb, to programs that have been around for a while, right? I'm happy when new programs come out. I investigate them. I look at them. Sometimes I offer them to my clients, depending on what I feel about their robustness and stuff. But a new program is just a new program. We haven't gotten a chance when a new program comes out in a country to see how that program is received at multiple levels, not just among the public. Okay, but new program comes out, that means it's never been judicially challenged. That in that country, that means that some of the aspects of that program are not going to have any legal doctrine, okay, in that country, okay, any case law. They're not going to have any of these things. So that I think you have to discount in your consideration at least a little bit, okay. And obviously, to what extent you discount depends on the country, and obviously the country and program specific analysis. But I think you have to discount a little bit, for programs that are really, really new, right? So that's one thing that comes to my mind. And then I forgot. I had another point I was going to make, and I forgot what it was. So I'll pause and jump back in when I remember it.
I'm going to jump in here and say, and then I'll let you speak, Jay, because I think I just cut you off. But there is rarely, if you're willing to take a risk and you're willing for the outlay, there is a benefit to being a first participant or a first mover in some of these programs, because by the time it gets too popular, that's when there's challenges and the bureaucracy gets loaded up. Like, people have been talking about Italian citizenship for 20 years. There's I was doing some research. You guys are gonna think it's a little bit expedient of me to say, but I was doing some research on the Benin program, which is pretty heterodox because it requires a DNA test, which is very unusual. A DNA test plus some level of genealogical proof, right? And so that is a black box of money because DNA tests are expensive, and what their standards of proof are is unproven, right? Because the law is so vague. It's going to be, you got to be very, like, one document is not going to be proof enough, right? One affidavit is not going to be proof enough. And if it isn't, it's just going to sit in some bureaucratic office for a year or two until they tell you, we need something more, right? And by that time, there's going to be a ton of applications. They say theoretically 40 million people in the United States are theoretically eligible for that program in Benin. That is a shocking number. And to date, they've only processed like dozens of applications, even though the program is closing in on a year old, at least in terms of its announcement. And their bureaucracy is relatively responsive. So, like, you got a weird case of a citizenship by descent program that is new, that has undefined laws. And if you're willing to do the DNA test and spend the money to find the genealogical documents of, sub-Saharan African descendancy, like, it probably is going to benefit you to be, in a position as a first mover. So, that's me getting kind of ahead of it myself, but, like, again, with the Portugal program, it paid well to be a first mover in that program. If you're following in on the crowd and you're part of the big swell of demand, chances are you're going to run into more hurdles, be it bureaucratic or policy.
It's a great point, Patrick. Right? Yes, there is something to be said for a potential first mover advantage, in the sense that there's been less time for the public to catch wind of the program and be pissed off or whatever it is. I would make the argument that the first the how do I phrase this? The payoff for trying to take the potential payoff for trying to take advantage as a first mover is comparatively higher in citizenship by descent programs than citizenship or residency by investment programs, in my opinion. And the reason I say that is for one big reason, which is, generally speaking, there's way less money on the line for a person that's applying for a citizenship by descent program than somebody who's applying for a citizenship by investment or residency by investment program. Right? On the high end, even if you have to have pretty significant geological research, really on the high end for a citizenship by descent, you're looking at maybe 15, 20, and really I would argue the majority are under 15, maybe even under $10,000. Whereas for citizenship by investment and for residency, as far as capital outlay, you're looking at minimum 100 now, basically, and plenty of them are several $100,000, right? The other thing is for citizenship programs, you have one, in theory, you have one application process, which is the citizenship. You don't have a long build up, to the naturalization eligibility point, in which you're vulnerable, right? That's a little bit of a difference. That's a lot of a difference, in my opinion, right? I see so the longer. I mean, this might sound trite, but I think it has to be said. The longer the period of residency that a person has to have in order to apply for naturalization, so in order to get to that first point of naturalization eligibility, the more of a vulnerability they have. Longer period of vulnerability. They have to keep their status, and they have to and laws have to not change, all the different types of, all the different forms of law that I said, legislative change, written regulatory change, unwritten regulatory change, culture change at the agency, all four of those, right? So the longer the residency, in my opinion, the more vulnerable generally the person is, leading up to the citizenship, leading up to the naturalization eligibility point, Now, on the flip side, there's a tension here, though, because anytime you're talking about a mobility benefit, so citizenship, residency, or other thing that's based off of investment, we're seeing more countries be antagonistic to that. Not just countries internally antagonistic to their own program, but we've spoken about this many times in previous spaces, we're seeing countries not want to recognize a citizenship fully of a foreign person if they got that based off of investment. Okay. So the flip side to that longer period of residency leading up to naturalization being a bigger attack vector, more attack vectors, is that we are seeing, I believe, that the longer period of residency that a person has before getting citizenship, the more robustness is infused in that citizenship in the eyes of foreign countries. And what I mean by is this: we're seeing countries, a trend, okay, where if a person has, let's call it zero residency on one extreme to, let's call it 5 years or 3 years, okay, 3 to 5 years, okay, on the other end, okay, foreign countries are less likely to try to deprive a benefit of that citizen, okay, whether it's a straight citizen by investment or a citizen who got there based off of a residency by investment. We're seeing them be more antagonistic if there was no period of residency or a very short period of residency, and less antagonistic if there's a longer period of residency. So that's a tension, obviously, right? So if you're somebody who's really into this stuff, and you're thinking long-term, building your citizenship and residency portfolio, okay, on one hand, it's like, okay, the longer I got to have this residency before I can pull the trigger on the NATS application, the more exposure I have, okay, to this risk. But on the flip side, arguably, once if you do run that gauntlet successfully and get the citizenship, arguably you're going to be in a better position having that citizenship and trying to get springboard benefits in other countries. And just, Jay and Patrick, you've been on many spaces before, Analisa too, but to a lesser extent. But just for other people who haven't heard these examples before, United States. Okay, so United States E2 non-immigrant investor treaty. Okay, in order to qualify for the non-immigrant E2 investor visa in the United States, you have to be citizen of a treaty country. Okay. In 2022, the United States changed in the Immigration and Nationality Act their definition of citizen, okay, for the purposes of the E2 treaty visa, to be only a citizen by investment if the person also was domiciled there for at least 3 years. Okay, so that's an example that I'm talking about. Okay, where literally the United States in this case is looking into, we have a treaty, okay, other countries are part of that treaty, and we're looking into the circumstances of the naturalization of a person in a foreign country and deciding whether we're going to say that they qualify for our treaty or not. We're seeing, in my opinion, an uptick trend in that type of thing happening. So it's tough, right? There's not necessarily like an obvious blunt heuristic that a person can apply.
There's a famous example I like to bring up, and that is the citizenship for the tiny micronation of San Marino, which has a 20-year naturalization timeline, among the highest in the world, and for those countries who allow naturalization. And I bring that up because people obviously poke at that and be like, why is it that long? Like, why not? Why have the program, right? And it's considered, very robust because how many people does this actually apply to? It's probably literally single digits every year. And I joke and I think to myself, well, it's because it's designed for Italian citizens who live, one city over, who changed their domicile and residence to this place and then happened to be there for 20 years. Like it's a very draconian law, but in practice, it's because they just want to keep their naturalization program like hyper localized. And again, that's a pretty strong passport despite being a micronation. So thought that was a funny little example to add on.
Yeah, it's a good example. And then also just, Patrick, going back to the point you mentioned about first mover. When Hungary introduced its simplified naturalization law and program in 2011, there was a language requirement, just as there is today. Okay, so language requirement in 2011, language requirement in 2025. Okay, what does language requirement mean in practice? Nowadays, what it means in practice is you've got to be able to have a volley of conversation back and forth. You go to a consul, you submit your application, you must be able to go through your application and your documents to the person in Hungarian and explain it. And then you sit down with either the consul, if it's a small consulate, or one of the assistants, if it's a larger consul, and you talk about your life. What do you do for a living? You answer their questions. How was it getting here today? Tell me about your Hungarian ancestor. Have you ever been to Hungary? Did you grow up speaking Hungarian? You got to have a conversation in Hungarian. That's in 2025. What was the Hungarian language requirement in 2011? Going in and saying, hi, how are you? Okay, this was actually, there was an article about, more than one article, but there was one article that I remember in particular written by the BBC. Okay, hi, how are you? If you could say, hi, how are you? My name is Parviz or whatever it is, people were getting approved, okay, and getting Hungarian citizenship. Same text, okay, of a language requirement. There was not a legislative amendment, okay, or, increase in difficulty legislatively, okay. But that's how much, okay, the difference in culture of application of informal changes can matter. In one instance, you could learn how to say a few phrases in 10 minutes, maybe before you walk into your appointment. And in the other instance, which is what we have today, people are preparing and learning Hungarian for a year, 2 years, 3 years. They're learning a foreign language, okay, to roughly B2, B1 or B2 level, if you're familiar with the common European frameworks for languages. So that's a great example. If it's CBD, if it's citizenship by descent, I believe a strong heuristic, a good heuristic is all other things being considered equal, you want to move fast. I think if it's a program that involves a significant capital outlay, I think the analysis becomes a little bit more murky. It's a little bit more situation specific to determine whether you want to take the plunge, especially if it's a lot of money that's involved. Okay, so we've been going for, it's 12:14 Pacific Standard. We've been going for an hour and 11 minutes. This has been a great conversation. I have a topic I want to talk about. It doesn't have to be our next space, okay? But what I'd like to do is solicit if anybody has any suggestions for something that they want to talk about for our very next space. That would be number 47, okay, which would be next Monday. Please let me know, okay? And then after everybody goes, or if anybody goes, I'm going to say what my suggested space topic is. So does anybody have, oh, we got Gabo here. Welcome, Gabo. Does anybody have a topic that they would like to discuss? Urgently, burning, urgent topic.
So I'm just going to chime in on what you said previously. I've been learning Hungarian for about a year, and I actually was talking to one of my professors I go to law school, and I was talking to one of my professors, and he actually is in the process of getting the citizenship now. He actually went to a consular event where I live, and he introduced himself and his family in Hungarian to the consul, and they fingerprinted him. They got everything settled on the spot for him to get his loyalty oath done. And that might be very different from how they actually do the process in their actual consular locations. So even, person to person, day to day, based on where you do it, the experience might be very different from each person. So
that's a great anecdote. I'm glad you mentioned that, and I mean that's another whole topic, which is who you know. Okay, like connections and talking to the right person gets people fast tracked. It even gets people fast tracked in huge immigration bureaucracies like the United States has. That's a great anecdote. Yeah, those things happen. Absolutely, those things happen. I feel confident that that's not the case for the vast majority of at least for simplified NATS applicants. I don't know if that guy was applying for NATS or for verification.
He was applying for simplified naturalization.
Simplified NATS. Okay, great. Yeah, so I mean that's phenomenal. That does happen sometimes. I still think it's the strong minority.
I would think so too. I have my own appointment in January, so I'll let you guys know.
Awesome. Is that Professor Nick Szabo, Jay? Be honest. Is that Nick Szabo?
No, it's not. No, it's not.
All right.
I can tell you in the DMs.
All right. Sounds good. Okay. Any suggestions? Analisa, Patrick, Gabo. Otherwise, I'm gonna unleash my suggestion. See what people think.
Okay, this suggestion's a little self-serving, but someone mentioned it a while back, and I don't remember who. It might have been Jay, might have been Inverted, might have been. I don't think it was Patience is Alpha, but kind of the process for finding antiquated documents for citizenship by descent, and kind of what that research process looks like. And obviously, that's very self-serving because I could talk about that for hours. If it's at happy hour, I could almost probably clear a day yapping about that. So chucking it out there as an option.
I'm sorry, you cut out for me there, Patrick. I couldn't hear you. Can you just repeat the topic one more time?
Yeah. Someone mentioned it before, and it was what the research and process looks like if you are looking for antique or antiquated documents for citizenship by descent, and what that kind of research dashboard looks like. Obviously, that's a very self-serving topic because I could talk about that for hours, but checking it out there as an option before the end of the year.
Yeah, so I do citizenship by descent as well, as you know, Patrick. I'm interested. I could definitely ping back and forth with you on that. I would just want to make sure that it's interesting enough to catch enough people's attention. Otherwise, maybe you and I do it as a standalone, YouTube video or something. But okay, good topic. Anybody else? Okay, so here's my suggestion. So I made a tweet this morning, okay, about how people view citizenship. Okay, so it's the tweet that starts off, many people want to look at citizenship to be a proxy for everything: loyalty, ethnicity, political views, tax domicile, etc. And if you read the tweet, I end up basically, the point that I end up making is that in our current day and age, with nation states as the dominant sovereign entity, sovereign political entity, you can't function without citizenship. You need citizenship. It doesn't matter if you want to be political, impolitical, loyal, unloyal, if you don't care at all about governments or not. If you want to function in this day and age, you need citizenship. And if you want to function well, I argue, okay, if you want to function in a way that you're not significantly limited, really you got to have multiple citizenship, right? And I make the point at the end of the tweet that the opt-out that I refer to when I say multiple citizenship creates the genesis of robust opt-out ability. The opt-out is from nation state, not from nation in the broader term, okay? Meaning heritage, culture, history, shared identity, language. It's not about getting multiple citizenship for the majority of people, okay? In my experience, it's not about wanting to leave your background. It's about not wanting to be completely vulnerable, completely dependent on a single sovereignty, nation state, which is a government, a thing, an ephemeral political entity that's made up of politicians, not the heritage, not the culture, not the history. I'm really interested in this type of topic. It might be a little bit out there, esoteric. What do you guys think? And be honest. Obviously, be honest. Just tell me one by one, if you don't mind, whether this is something that you guys are interested in. And nobody's obviously obliged to attend if they give their opinion.
I like that as a topic. I think it's very relevant, and I still think as a global community, we're still in like the second or third inning, to borrow a baseball analogy, of that as a topic. So I think our conversation about it will be insightful, but definitely not the last time we talk about it.
I do think that's a good topic as well, especially considering that sort of anxiety about depending solely on one country is at the root of a lot of the issues and concerns that a lot of people have about politics as a reason to get residency, gain second citizenship, do some other thing that they wouldn't have thought about prior.
Yeah, absolutely. Analisa, does that float your boat or not so much?
Yeah, I'm going to abstain on this one because I had to dip out for a second, so go ahead without me.
Okay, no problem. We're just talking about what the topic should be for the next space. Okay, that's fine. Okay, let me think about it. I'll probably put up a poll. I'll make that be one of the options for the poll. I want to thank everybody for participating today, and I want to thank all of our listeners, including our anonymous listeners. Don't forget, 47th Mobility Space. We're coming down the home stretch. Our 47th is going to be next Monday, 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. The topic is TBD. Once we get to the 50th space, I'm going to take a short break. I'm going to reformat the show, and then we're going to continue on. So thank you, everybody. Have a great one.